picture of the situation that we're in now with these endless wars. So as I mentioned, we've been in these wars for over 18 years. This is the longest war that the United States has ever been in. It's longer than, just to give you an indication, it's longer than World War I, World War II, and the Civil War combined. Now, as you all know, this all began following the devastating attacks of September 11. 3 days after these attacks, Congress passed a law that authorized the president to use military force against those responsible for the 9/11 attacks and those who harbored them. And this was really Al-Qaeda who carried out those attacks and the Taliban who harbored Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. This law that Congress passed is called the 2001 Authorization for Use of Military Force, which we abbreviate to the 2001 AUMF, which Congresswoman Barbara Lee just spoke to you about. But while the 2001 AUMF was written to be fairly limited, 3 presidents from both sides of the aisle have stretched this law to take the country into additional wars against more than half a dozen groups all over the world. In fact, at last count, the 2001 AUMF has been used for 41 different military operations in 19 countries. Now, these operations range from combat in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Somalia, and Niger, to drone strikes in Yemen and Pakistan, to detention operations at Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. This really outrageous stretching of the 2001 AUMF is why it is known as the blank check for war. But there's also the second AUMF that is still in effect, and this is the 2002 Iraq AUMF. This second AUMF was passed to authorize the war against the Saddam Hussein regime. And the reason the American people were given for going to war in Iraq in the first place was that Saddam Hussein possessed weapons of mass destruction that were a threat to the United States. Now, as we all know, that turned out to be false. Saddam didn't have weapons of mass destruction. Nevertheless, we went into Iraq. We removed Saddam from power in 2003. Now, these endless wars that we've been fighting since 2001 have had devastating consequences. To give you a feeling for the costs of these wars, there were actually some new figures released just yesterday by the Brown University Costs of War Project. Approximately 800,000 people have been killed in these wars, including some 330,000 civilians. Over 7,000 US service members have also been killed, as well as nearly 8,000 US contractors. 53,700 US soldiers have been injured, and more than 300,000 have suffered traumatic brain injury. And that's not even counting the hundreds of thousands who have returned home with post-traumatic stress disorder or other mental illness. And what's more, after nearly 2 decades of fighting, it has become clear that this approach simply isn't working. It hasn't made the United States safer. We've created more enemies around the world, turned local populations against us, and seen an increase in terrorism attacks. And the price tag for all of this? Well, again, yesterday we got a new report on this. So these post-9/11 wars have now cost $6.4 trillion. But in the face of all of this devastation, all of this failure, all of this waste, the tide is finally turning. We are finally starting to see Congress start to take action to help bring an end to endless war. As I'm sure a lot of you know, the Constitution gives Congress the authority to decide whether the country chooses war. The framers of the Constitution specifically placed the power to declare war in the hands of Congress and not the President. And Congress has finally begun to reassert this important constitutional power. It has finally begun to act to stop the president from deciding when the country goes to war and to rein in endless war. So this brings me now to the unprecedented opportunity that we have before us and what you're all going to be lobbying your senators and representatives on. So you should all have a copy of the legislative ask in your lobby packets. So that is this one. It says, please support repeal of the 2002 Iraq AUMF. Congress must decide when the US goes to war. So to give you a little bit more background on this ask and to add to what Barbara Lee was just discussing, so in July this year, for the first time since the 2002 Iraq AUMF became law, a chamber of Congress has voted to repeal it. The U.S. House of Representatives adopted an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act, which is abbreviated to the NDAA, to finally repeal the 2002 Iraq AUMF. But the Senate passed their own version of the NDAA, and the Senate's version does not include this provision to repeal the 2002 Iraq AUMF. So right now, House and Senate negotiators are working to reach a final compromise version of the NDAA. And we need that final NDAA to include the House provision to repeal the 2002 Iraq AUMF. Now, I want to give a quick shout out to FCNL's incredible advocacy teams who have spent all year working on AUMF repeal. Their work has really been instrumental in getting us to the place that we're in now. We have a provision to repeal the 2002 Iraq AUMF in the NDAA, and this is really critical, we have growing bipartisan support to have that provision actually become law. We really have the power to win on this, and I'm so excited that you're all here to lobby on this issue. So to sort of better equip you, I want to give you 3 reasons to repeal the 2002 Iraq AUMF. First, it's no longer relevant. The 2002 Iraq AUMF authorized war against the Saddam Hussein regime. That war is long over. Saddam was overthrown in 2003, and in 2011, President Obama declared the Iraq War over and brought US troops home. It is the responsible course to repeal this outdated, irrelevant AUMF. Second, it's not needed for current operations. The Trump administration has admitted that the 2002 Iraq AUMF only reinforces the authority under the 2001 AUMF for some operations. So I guess you have the question, well, then why do we need to repeal it if it isn't needed? Well, that brings me to the third reason, to prevent its abuse. Repealing the 2002 Iraq AUMF would prevent this president or any future president abusing this law, misinterpreting it to justify a new war that Congress hasn't authorized. And this is a real concern. Both the Obama and Trump administrations have claimed that the 2002 Iraq AUMF is broader than what Congress originally intended. Just last year, the Trump administration said that the 2002 Iraq AUMF authorizes force against threats stemming from Iraq, but also threats to Iraq from, and I quote, Syria or elsewhere. And with the administration's recent posturing about attacking Iran, there is a real concern that leaving the 2002 Iraq AUMF on the books could provide an avenue for the president to justify attacking Iran under that law. This is not what the framers of the Constitution intended when they gave Congress the power to declare war. They did not intend for presidents to repurpose old AUMFs to justify new wars. So repealing the 2002 Iraq AUMF would really be a critical first step towards Congress reasserting its constitutional war powers and saying, we're not okay that the president is twisting a law that was passed 17 years ago to take us into new wars. The president doesn't get to decide if we go to war. We get to decide this. So now we have a real chance to finally repeal the 2002 Iraq AUMF. And one of the things that makes this such a unique opportunity is that the House provision to repeal this law has very broad bipartisan support. Indeed, the Heritage Foundation recently released a report that supports repealing the 2002 Iraq AUMF, and it's because it's the constitutionally conservative thing to do. And there are many other conservative groups that feel exactly the same way. But to make this happen, your senators and your representatives need to hear from you, from their constituents. So our legislative ask, as is set out in the blue box here, this is, if there are any words you need to remember from this sheet, these are the ones. They ask for your senators and representatives to urge Armed Services Committee leadership to include the House provision repealing the 2002 Iraq AUMF in the final NDAA. So I'll just repeat that. So the ask is for your senators and representatives to urge Armed Services Committee leadership to include the House provision to repeal the 2002 Iraq AUMF in the final NDAA. These leaders are the decision makers. They're the members of Congress who will decide if we finally repeal the 2002 Iraq AUMF or if we leave it on the books for the president to abuse. Now, I want to finish up with some tips on lobbying on this issue. So first of all, when I lobby on repealing the 2002 Iraq AUMF, and when our advocacy teams have lobbied on this, we have often found that members of Congress and their staff will mix up the 2001 AUMF with the 2002 Iraq AUMF. So the 2001 AUMF, that was the one that was passed 3 days after 9/11. That is the one that is called the blank check for war. That is a lot more controversial. We would love to repeal that eventually, and I'm sure we will. But right now we are focused on the 2002 Iraq AUMF because that is the law that has a really, really good chance of actually being repealed this year. So I would just encourage you to keep an ear out for this happening. And if it does, gently tell the staff, gently tell your member of Congress that we're only talking about the 2002 Iraq AUMF here. That is the law that isn't needed for ongoing operations and that has broad bipartisan support. Second, you might get some pushback from your member of Congress or their staff who tell you, well, I'm not one of the leaders of the Armed Services Committees. I'm not involved in these negotiations. There's really nothing I can do on this issue. It's too late. But that is not true. When you get that kind of pushback, you want to respond by respectfully asking if your senator or representative could talk to the leaders of the Senate or House Armed Services Committees and ask them to keep the provision to repeal the 2002 Iraq AUMF in the final NDAA. Don't let them get away with saying there's nothing they can do, but always be kind and be respectful with your response. Now, finally, I just wanted to add a little note about what this could mean for our future work on ending endless wars. If Congress finally repeals the 2002 Iraq AUMF, this will be the first time since 2001 that Congress has acted to repeal any AUMF. This would be a momentous development and it would open the door to building more support for repealing the 2001 AUMF. Once Congress has repealed one AUMF, we're just that much closer to getting them to act on another one. They'll have done it once, they can do it again. So I want to conclude by just saying and reiterating that I am just so thrilled that you're all here to lobby on ending endless wars and repealing the 2002 Iraq AUMF. We really have such an incredible opportunity here to finally get rid of this law and to take a critical step towards ending endless war. Thank you.